And good morning, and welcome to another live stream. Uh, First things first, look, I need everyone's support. If people who are watching, if you haven't already subscribed, please hit that subscribe button. And also, once you do that, go to the options and select all notifications. That way, when I put up a video or do a live stream, you're notified straight away. Um, There's no costs involved. It's all absolutely free, but yeah, I do need your support for that. Now, I come across a article on LinkedIn where there's allegedly 70% of allied health workers who witness some kids with disabilities at schools being isolated or kept in a room like a cage with that has bars on it. Um, Now I'm not sure if this is true, especially the cage part. But if it is, it's absolutely abhorrent that these sorts of actions are still happening. Absolutely abhorrent. Now, I've contacted the person who put that story out asking for more information. I just want to know who conducted the poll and where the poll was conducted and all the other information that goes along with that, just to make sure everything's on the up and up. But at this stage, I've heard nothing back. So all the things we're going to talk about regarding this issue is they're all alleged at this stage. I can't prove whether they're right or wrong. So, but we've got to take a look at kids with disabilities going to a public school. Now, I know some kids who have a cognitive impairment, s- they assimilate quite well into the classroom. However, I know there's some cases where whatever their disability is, some children can be quite physical, hitting other students, or quite loud and distract other students and the teacher from doing her job. Teachers aren't social workers and teachers are not qualified or experienced in socializing children with disabilities and teaching them new behaviors and that whole field. Is it unfair to separate kids with disabilities who interrupt the classroom, whether it's, being loud and disruptive or being physical with them, other students or the teacher, or even self-harming, hitting themselves head up against a wall or something. We have to be fair to everyone in the classroom. One person's right does not override another person's right. We have to be very careful when we walk this line. But when I read that some of these children, apart from being isolated, kept away from other children in the classroom. No, nothing to do. There's no aids to help them communicate. No, nothing. So they're just completely isolated. Now, if they're being really disruptive, I can understand separating that child until they calm down, then reintroduce them to the classroom. I can understand that. But as far as putting them in a cage, what are we going back to the 1600s? Now, with the introduction of the NDIS, um, kids with disabilities have been assimilated into public schools, and a lot of these public schools aren't equipped to handle kids with disabilities. Now, when my children went to primary school, there's a public school, primary school less than a kilometre away from where I live. But I chose to send them to another school that had kids there with disabilities because I wanted my kids to know that just because you have a disability doesn't mean you can't enjoy life, you can't be happy, you can't have a fulfilling, happy life. And they're just like everyone else, they just learn in a different way. And that worked really, really well. But with the introduction of the NDIS, a lot of these kids are being forced into the school system when they're not equipped to handle you know, kids with high needs, complex needs. So, like I said, teachers aren't social workers. They don't have qualifications in behavioural um, sciences or anything like that. It's look, we need to tread very carefully. But this poll, 70% of workers witnessed these things happening. Now, I've actually got a question whether that's true or not, whether they just did that to clickbait you into reading the article. I don't know. But I'll going to reach out and see if I can get this person on to a live stream in the next few weeks to talk about it because this is an important issue. And I remember watching one of the architects of the NDIS where he said the NDIS was not designed to put kids with disabilities into public schools. It was not designed to do that. But as we all know, as soon as the NDIS came in, all the states dumped their disability services and forced everyone onto the NDIS. That's one of the main reasons for the cost blowout now, in my opinion, is what the states have done. It's not just one state, all states have done it. And now with these new reforms that Bill Shorten has introduced, that, you know, the states are going to have to start reintroducing some disability services. So where do we go from here? Now, what do we do with children who have behavioural problems? You know, and once they're isolated or put into a room or that looks like a cage, I think there was one case where a child was put into a cage-like room with bars on it with his support person, and he became so distressed he was smashing his head up against the steel bars, and he hurt himself badly. Are we actually helping that child, or are we harming that child? That's the question. And I don't know if there's anyone out there listening now who's got experience in this field that'd like to come up and talk about it because I have no experience. Only through sending my children to a school that has children with disabilities because the school was originally a school for kids with disabilities, but they turned it into a public primary school, and it's worked exceptionally well. And I know there's other kids in other public primary schools and high schools with disabilities, and they're struggling. And by isolating these children, do we not then make them targets from the other children? Is that being antisocial towards that child with a disability? I don't know. I'd like to find out more information. There's a lot of questions I'd like to ask. Like I said, I don't have the qualifications to speak a lot on it, but isolating children or locking them in a room that looks like a cage is abhorrent. It really is. It's going back into the dark ages. And so, what's our next step? Do we step backwards and start putting kids in institutions again? So, if anyone's got any feedback who specialises in the area, please contact me. My email is blindadvocate007 at gmail.com. I'd really love to hear from you. Now, we've all seen over the last week or so that Bill Shorten's retiring and he's going to become a vice chancellor at Canberra University. I wish him luck, but you know, where do we go from here? You know, who's going to replace him? Is the person going to replace him got any knowledge or experience of working in this area, the disability field? Probably not, but we'll have to wait and see what happens. Also, I was watching on YouTube this morning. I suffer with insomnia, so I get up and I go onto YouTube and look at different things. And Senator Pauline Hanson was trying to introduce a bill to look into body dysphoria and puberty blockers and children going through a transgender and like males who identify as females using female facilities and competing in female sports. Now, she introduced this bill the other day, or she tried to, but it was blocked by the Labor Party and the Greens. Now, for this to happen's been quite rare. It's only happened half a dozen times in 100 years, over 100 years. Now, we need our representatives to the government to be upfront and honest and be transparent, because what they've essentially done is that they haven't just blocked Senator Pauline Hanson, they've blocked all those people that she represents. And why can't we have a debate? Why can't we discuss these things? Now, I've seen one of the people from the Greens get up and say it's a thinly veiled attempt. It's just hatred against transgender people, and it's disgusting, and it shouldn't have. What's disgusting is that you won't allow an open debate. I was talking to someone years ago, and we're talking about getting into arguments and debating and having discussions. And this person said one of the most things I remember throughout my whole life. He said, if you're debating someone or discussing something with someone and you put up all these facts that they cannot refute, the first thing they do is call you a bigot, a racist, or you're being discriminatory. They attack the person personally. And this is what the Greens have done and the Labor Party has done. Now, I don't agree with everything that Senator Pauline Hanson says. I think she's upfront and honest. I personally thought John Howard was a little bit on the bigoted side. That's my opinion of John Howard. But I also have an opinion he done a bloody good job doing for the economics of this country. and planning for the future. He'd done a fantastic job. But Kevin Dudd came in 2007 and ruined it all. Kevin Rudd and Julia Gillard, in my opinion, have been the worst prime ministers this country has ever seen. They rushed things out so quickly, like the free insulation, that ended up killing 6 or 7 young teenagers working weekends to earn a bit of money because the people who are doing the insulation weren't experienced. They were electrocuted. And they're building the education revolution, the BER, where they spent tens of billions on upgrading school facilities. Now, there's a school in Port Macquarie who put up sailcloths over like a few lunch tables, picnic tables. It cost them $7,500. And the BER came out, the Building the Education Revolution, brought out by Rudd and Gillard. That blew out to $49,000 for the exact same thing. The NBN, Labor rushed that out. Now, I live in Armidale, and Armidale was one of the first towns, the first town to go onto the NBN. And when we were talking about it, I said, why isn't the government just spending the money on upgrading the wireless systems through the mobile phones? Because other countries don't use fibre optics. It's too expensive. And the cost blew out. It doubled. Now we're up to 5G, and it's just as good as the fibre optics. Yep.
We've just got Amy Hall, the author of the article that you were talking about before, has come on and said through LinkedIn, Jeff, I saw the title of your post today. Very keen to hear your thoughts about kids in cages. One of my passion projects is to stamp this out.
Is she still in the chat?
I can't get into LinkedIn through mine. So,
Amy, if you're listening, the author of that report I was talking about, if you come to my YouTube channel, Blind Advocate, there's a link there you can press to come up, and we can have a chat about it, because I would like to hear your side, your story, and your points of view on the issues with the public school system. So, if you could do that as soon as possible, that'd be really good. Thank you. But why is the government not allowing these debates to go ahead? Why are they labeling people racist and bigots and discriminatory? Why can't we have an open discussion? Why can't the government be transparent? They're supposed to work for us. They're there for our benefit. But all they seem to do is get elected and feather their own nests. Especially the Labor Party, look at the CMFEU, the union links to organised crime. And they're putting huge amounts of money into the Labor Party. There's feedback.
I'm trying to comment. I'm trying to respond. She's trying to get on now.
Okay.
So she's trying to get into the stream.
So, look, I agree with Senator Pauline Hanson. There needs to be an open discussion, and it needs to be transparent about transgender. I'm not against it. Adults want to do that, go for it. I don't think men who identify as women should be allowed in female bathrooms or change rooms. If they want to wear a dress around and pretend to be a female, go for it. But you're still a male. Men shouldn't be in female sports either. I'm a huge supporter of that Riley Gaines, the American swimmer who swam against that Leah Thomas, 6'4" man swimming against a 5'2" woman in a university competition.
Well, Amy's here if you.
Yep, to bring it up. So everyone, we've got Amy who wrote the report through LinkedIn. Welcome, Amy.
G'day. How you going, Jeff?
Good, thanks. Can you give us some more information on that story you posted?
Yeah, sure. So I've been a behaviour practitioner for a long time, many years, but before that I was a teacher. So I've been an educator for 20 years. So I've been in and out of schools most of my career. So I've seen a lot of practice with children with disabilities, both in schools as an educator, but also now as a behaviour practitioner, and trying to bring awareness to practices that are happening in schools all the time. And a couple of the clients, I work with some really complex young people who are in schools, and in my work, I've been trying to draw awareness to educators and school leaders that putting these kids in enclosures when they have really unsafe behaviours is not the way to go. Now, it's not the way to go in any system, I guess, when you're a child, because seclusion is actually illegal and it's a prohibited practice, particularly with children with disabilities. But I was experiencing so much pushback by trying to speak, particularly in New South Wales, where I'm based, because in New South Wales, seclusion is illegal in every other environment except New South Wales departmental schools. So what I was struggling with was, I did a poll, did some research, and I had about 60 practitioners and I'm a clinical supervisor. I've got 55 behaviour support practitioners right across Australia that I speak to very frequently. And I did this poll, and about 70% of them indicated that they've witnessed, seen, or they know about these practices across Australia actually occurring. But my own personal experience was the children that I've supported in schools to try to support them developing safe behaviours or other safe communications of the way that when they get distressed, their educators would just put them in what is tantamount to an enclosure or a cage. And the local allied health professionals in my area where this is happening have known this is happening in these particular schools for years. No one's been able to do anything about it. There's never been any changes, no matter how many complaints we've made, no matter how much noise we've made, we never achieved anything. And so when I got to the point where I don't want to go back into some of these schools, because no matter how hard I fight, no matter how much I'm trying really hard to play the game from the political discourse of policies and protecting teachers and protecting other students, at the end of the day, I went into one of these cages with my client and experienced what that was like with them. And I wasn't allowed to come back into the learning space for about 15 minutes. And so I'm sitting there on a concrete ground, out in the elements, in the wind, in the sun, with my client who wasn't allowed their communication device. There's no toilet facility. There's no toilet access. There's no clean water for 15 minutes. And it was only and it was locked. We're in a cage, metal bars surrounding us. So that was one instance. The second instances that I raised in the article was that one of my participants, I wasn't there at the time, they were being supported, were put in the cage, and they were banging their head so hard in distress that they split their head open. And as a result of splitting their head open, they were not allowed to be coming out because they were deemed too unsafe. And they waited until the person's support staff got to the school, and then they called the ambulance. And only when the paramedics were being quite forceful, saying, please open this gate, were the child or the young person allowed to actually come out. So I guess there were two reasons why in these instances I needed to speak, and I needed to get some attention brought to these issues. Two reasons being, number one, it is happening. Putting our heads in the sand at blatant human rights abuses that are occurring in schools is not okay. It's not okay for me. I've got kids in schools. It's not okay for anyone to put their head in the sand and say it's not happening. It's also not okay, in my opinion, to use the excuse that it's easier to put a kid in a cage than it is to train the teachers on other ways of supporting that child and understanding that child and building better infrastructure around our schools and our teachers and systems and environments that supports regulation, rather than the easy thing, which is to just lock them away. But the second reason is that there's a real difficulty in the congruence of the legislation. In New South Wales, I'm a mandatory reporter in child protection. If I'm aware that one of my families or one of my parents put their child in their bedroom and locked the door, that's a mandatory report. I've got to make a mandatory report to child protection because it's illegal. It's an illegal act. No matter what the reason is, it doesn't matter what the reason is, that's what the law says. How is it then that a school where it's supposed to be a safe, supportive space can legally put a child in an enclosure and have absolutely no accountability or recourse? And so for me, I really want to see policy change that actually supports a human rights discourse of all people, all children, not just kids with disabilities, but also stops this, what I think is an endemic cultural view within education of othering. So putting kids away or separating or segregating. And I know that this is not a simple answer, black, white. It's not about that. I'm not saying that teachers are doing this because they're trying to cause harm. I don't think they're trying to cause harm, but I know for a fact they are causing harm. Whether it's intended or not, they're causing harm. The research is absolute on this fact. Seclusion practices damage people with disabilities, all people with disabilities. That's why it's a prohibited practice in the NDIS under the Quality and Safeguards and Restricted Practice legislation. So the reason for me is that's why I got sick and tired of being pushed back.
Well, like I said, I don't know if you heard, I've had no experience in this area. That's why I was talking about it this morning. I do appreciate you coming up. But so are the teachers taught to identify triggers that may set these children off being disruptive or, whatever the case may be?
I can only say from my own experience, from my own training, because I don't think it's fair for me to make a comment on my training was 20 years ago. And I've had much more training since I was initially trained. But if we put an argument down that in teacher education, in pre-service teacher education, I'm going to make some assumptions, so I could be wrong. But I'm assuming that in pre-teacher training, you get probably 1 to 2, maybe 2 subjects out of your entire degree that actually look specifically at managing or understanding behaviour. It's almost exclusively used in the positive behaviour support framework, which is the framework that the NDIS and that I work under. But when we talk about triggers, teachers are not psychologists, they're not social workers, they're not occupational therapists, they're not speech pathologists, they're teachers. So their actual training is not in understanding behaviour, it's in developing and understanding and teaching curriculum. So while I think that they're doing as best job as they possibly can, particularly our early career teachers, no, I don't think they're given a massive amount of training or support, I guess, in that first 12 to 2 years of their trade. That being said, there is an embedded awareness of ongoing professional development. But when you are a new teacher, an early career teacher, even in the first 3 years of your career, you're at a rapid learning phase of learning how to teach, learning how to manage all these children and young people, learning how to meet the requirements of your role and reporting. And teachers are notoriously time poor. So when we talk about training takes time, training takes practice. Training requires resourcing, and training requires a culture that you need to be able to try and fail in order to learn. If you're not in a culture or a school where that's actually promoted, and I certainly know from my own experience, if you get things wrong sometimes in certain schools, and if you're a casual teacher, for example, you don't get called back the next day. So there really isn't a sense in my mind in some schools or in some systems where training to identify triggers is an important thing. It's get them out. We've got a job to do. We've got a curriculum to maintain. We've got to protect all these other kids. Get them out. Leave them outside or seclude or exchange. I mean, I don't understand how we have the culture at the moment where it's perfectly acceptable to suspend 7 and 8 year olds or 6-year-olds 5 or 6 times a year. Suspend them for up to 20 days at a time. 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds. Because again, if the resourcing is not available in the school, if the training is not available for the educators, that's the only option they have in order to get the job done. in terms of educating all of these other kids.
When these kids with disabilities are being isolated or put in cage-like environments, does that then, I made this point earlier on, does that then not make them a target by other students?
Yeah, I think what it does without people realizing is it puts a target on their back, but it also just makes them different. And what it says to the other kids is, oh, that's okay. We can just treat them. They're over there. We don't have to think about them. We don't have to demonstrate compassion or show understanding or try to see things from their perspective. That's one of the messages. But I think the other message is it makes it really hard for them to come back into the group. Once you've been separated, it makes it really hard. You then get labeled as the naughty kid or as the kid that, everyone gets all the extra attention. It actually can make it harder for you to break down that stigma with your peers, especially if they're really little. I've got little ones that I work with who have been labelled the naughty kid. And then when they're actually travelling really well, they've had lots of help, they've had lots of intervention and support and lots of environmental changes. And finally, they're starting to feel much better and they're starting to feel really regulated and safe. But the other kids have already thought, and their parents sometimes have already said, oh, stay away from that child. They're the naughty child. They're a bad influence. So I think that we've got unintended consequences of the way we manage, particularly children who have really unsafe behaviours that are misunderstood. And a lot of the time they're misunderstood in ways that we're not seeking to understand them. But that's where I think my advocacy is really focused in on changing policy. Nothing is ever going to change until policy changes. It's as simple as that. Policy and law is what changes things in culture, and it's a trickling down effect. But I think that in my world that I live in behaviour support, I am committed to eliminating restrictive practices where we can, and seclusion is a restrictive practice that harms people. It disconnects people and it reinforces a sense of unsafety, which then permeates and continues behaviours of concern and distress-based behaviours because they continuously feel disconnected and unsafe from their world. So, look, I'm a woman who lives with disability. I'm autistic. I've got ADHD. I have learning disabilities. I struggled myself in school. I'm a carer. I have fear, real fear for kids in schools. But I also know that with fear comes we can do some change. We can make some improvements.
Oh, absolutely. And I did say before that I think isolating students and putting them in a room that's like a cage is absolutely abhorrent. We're going backwards. We're not going forwards. When my children, sorry.
No, I often wonder if the person who wrote the policy that actually enabled that had a child who was put in one of those cages. I often wonder, would that actually have passed the pub test? Do you know? I often wonder who writes things that give permission for this for any reason. That makes it really hard for me to understand.
Yeah, no, I totally agree 100%. And when I first read your article yesterday, I was thinking about it last night and I thought, now, if I was to take you and lock you in a room, I'd go to jail.
That's right.
So I just don't understand where putting children in a locked room or isolate into a room, locking them away, it's illegal. And like you said, I don't understand why it's okay through the Department of Education. I mean,
because they don't want the alternative, which is money, resource, training, time, and changing a culture. And I think that changing culture is harder. I've got to go, Jeff, but there's one more thing I want to say. Firstly, thank you so much for bringing awareness to this. It's something that I really am passionate about. And I think that I'm a big believer that I don't want to contribute to the bitch fest about piling on to teachers. This is not it. I'm a teacher myself. This is not about saying that there's wrong happening. There is wrong, but the wrong that's happening is allowed, which I don't like. And I want to change that. The last thing I wanted to say before I jump off, I've got to duck off to the dentist, which I've been avoiding for 2 years, so I have to go. But I really just want to promote that we need people to speak up that this is happening, because I've now been blacklisted from 2 schools. I'm not allowed to go back into those schools because they fear that I'm going to report on practices that they know aren't okay, but that they're allowed to do by policy. So The reason that it keeps happening is because as soon as someone talks about it, as soon as someone raises it, then powerful systems, I think, that are already in place that want to keep this in place, shut those voices down. So the more voices that are aware of this happening, the more that they demand change. I think that's the only way we're going to stop kids being put in cages, because it's happening. It happens every single day. I've got clients of mine that get put in these cages 9 times a day. That's documented. That's not anecdotal. That's actually on a report from the school themselves. So for me, we need to keep talking. We need to keep talking. We need to keep putting it in people's faces and saying, are you okay for this happening in your school? Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm sorry I can't stay longer.
No, that's okay. Thank you for coming up, and I'll reach out to you through LinkedIn, and we'll organise another time for you to come on.
Would appreciate that.
In more detail, because I really am worried about this practice. It scares me.
Thank you so much, Jeff. Take care.
Thank you, Amy. Bye. Okay, everyone. So that was Amy. She's the one who wrote that report that I read through LinkedIn, and I put that link into the comments section so people can go read it for themselves. But putting children in cages, locking them away, I always thought that was against the law. And after I read the report yesterday, I was thinking about it last night. If you or I were to do that to somebody without a disability, we'd be in jail. We would be in jail. So why is the Department of Education getting away with it? Well, up comes another letter to a state politician. Whoever's in charge of the Department of Education, expect a letter from me, wanting clarification on this issue, and I'll let everyone know what happens. But I'm disgusted, from what Amy was saying. This is happening in 2024. I thought we were supposed to be more progressive. We're going backwards in some areas. It's just how the Department of Education is allowed to make this legal, where for everyone else it's illegal. It's breaching the discrimination laws. It's breaching the United Nations Human Rights Act. And let's not forget, in some countries 100 years ago, if children were born with a defect or a disability, a couple of things happened. First, they were left out in the bush, in the wilderness to die. 2, they were put in an institution. Then we made a huge, in the 1980s, when the institutions were starting to close, people with disabilities thought, great, we're moving forward. We're being part of the community. We're being accepted. No, not all of us. Absolutely disgusting. I'm going to write to the Minister of Department of Education. It's got to stop. But I will reach out to Amy and get her on when she's got more time, because we need to go into more detail of this. It's got to stop. Got to stop. Well, that's probably about all for this week, and there's no other comments. Next Tuesday, I'm interviewing Melissa Wood, who supports the well-being of support workers, so they don't burn out, because those of us who live with disabilities or work in the field know that support workers often face huge difficulties. They form attachments, and then their client has a health issue, and with complex needs, it does take a toll. People do burn out. I've seen it so many times over the last 30 odd years that people, support workers, they're so dedicated, they just burn themselves out. They really do. So Melissa Wood, she provides wellbeing supports to support workers. Um, so that will be an interesting discussion next Tuesday, and I will reach out to Amy to talk about the Department of Education in a few weeks' time. So we might end it there. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, everyone. Please don't forget to subscribe to this channel. I need your support. Okay, thank you.